Thanks for joining us as we take a deep dive into all things people, power, and politics. This is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. On this somber Memorial Day, I'm a purist when it comes to this day. It isn't Happy Memorial Day. After all, when the barbecue pits are cleaned up and the day ends, it's really more about how we paid special tribute to those who gave their lives to keep our country safe. The ultimate sacrifice will never be forgotten, and our hearts are with the families of those fallen heroes tonight and every night. We begin at Arlington National Cemetery, where President Donald Trump continued the tradition of laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth were also on hand for the ceremony. The president also spoke at the event, honoring service members who gave their lives, thanking them for their bravery.
They plunged into the crucible of battle, stormed into the fires of hell, charged into the valley of death, and rose into the arms of angels. The sacrifice that they made was not merely for a single battle, a long ago victory, or a fleeting triumph, decades or centuries past. Their sacrifice was for today, tomorrow, and every morning thereafter.
His speech did briefly veer political when he talked about the job he's done in the last 4 months.
A republic that I am fixing after a long and hard 4 years. That was a hard 4 years we went through. Who would let that happen? People pouring through our borders unchecked. People doing things that are indescribable and not for today to discuss. But the republic that is now doing so very well, we're doing so very well right now, considering the circumstances, and will do record-setting better with time.
Back now, though, to the wreath laying. The tomb of the unknown soldier is the burial site of a soldier from World War I whose remains couldn't be identified. Unknown remains from later wars were added in 1958 and then in 1984. As we move forward in tonight's show, we know political news never stops, and there's no shortage right now, even on this holiday. You know, a lot has been said about Mayor Mike Duggan's decision to run for governor as an independent, but he doesn't believe that race is the only one he'll factor into. You'll hear his words and reaction tonight. And so many of you have written asking what's next for Medicaid with cuts on the table in Congress. An elder law attorney is back on the Pulse taking more of your questions tonight. But we have an update now in President Trump's trade war to tell you about. Trump says he'll delay a 50% tariff on goods from the European Union until July 9th to buy time for negotiating. He says the president of the European Commission came to the table and told reporters about the call he had with her.
Said she wants to get down to serious negotiation because I've told you specifically, haven't I told anybody that would listen? They have to do that. And we had a very nice call, and I agreed to move it.
It's a quick pause from the taxes he pledged on Friday. The European Commission president called the U.S. and EU relationship the most consequential and closest in the world, adding they're ready to advance talks swiftly and decisively. All right, time now to open up the Pulse mailbox. We always say the show is about you, and we mean it. We welcome your political questions, a fact check you want to see, or a comment about the show in general. And one man had a comment about a reality check we did last week on Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and her, can't argue this, incorrect definition of habeas corpus. She got it wrong. Maurice wrote the Pulse over the weekend and said this: one point you overlooked in your fact check on Kristi Noem's use of habeas corpus, you incorrectly stated that only Congress has suspended it in the past. Fact is, President Lincoln actually suspended it in 1861 without authorization of Congress. This would support the stance that the president has the war power to enact items for 60 days. With Lincoln, Congress did not approve the suspension until later, and possibly not for a few years. I know he did so without Congress, just not sure when Congress later approved it. One article suggests it may have been in 1867. Well, Maurice, we thank you for writing in. You know, when we covered this story last week, we said the previous instances of habeas corpus being suspended usually involved congressional approval. We never said exclusively because, you know what? You're right, Maurice. President Lincoln did suspend habeas corpus back in 1861. Simply put, we didn't go into the Lincoln case that night because we only had limited time. But you know what? It really is a fascinating case. So let's do it now. For context, this happened not long after the start of the Civil War. Rewind back in 1861. For those of you who saw our reality check last week, bear with us here just for a second. We wanted to remind you what habeas corpus is. It's a Latin term that means you have the body. It allows people to challenge whether their imprisonment is legal. Under the Constitution, this right can only be suspended in cases of rebellion or invasion if it's required for public safety. And that's happened, count them, 4 times. Like we said off the top, most of the time with the authorization of Congress. The time it wasn't, the first time it was suspended in the first few months of the Civil War. So stay with me here. President Thomas Jefferson had tried to suspend habeas corpus, but that was denied. Fast forward to 1861, Lincoln didn't even bother going to Congress. He said, you know what, his military commanders should suspend access to the writ of habeas corpus as appropriate. That caught the eye of the Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time, Roger Taney, when the case of a man accused of being part of an armed secessionist group landed before him. That same year in 1861, Taney issued a ruling saying in part this: the clause in the Constitution which authorizes the suspension of the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus is in the 9th section of the 1st article. Now, this article is devoted to the legislative department of the United States and has not the slightest reference to the executive department. And that part is true. Article 1 of the Constitution is dedicated to Congress. But Lincoln argued the Constitution didn't say which branch could suspend it. And he continued to suspend it in other situations after that ruling. And then in 1863, Congress gave him permission to suspend habeas corpus for the remainder of the war. Now, I know it's a lot we gave you, so maybe you want a DVR, or if you're on your phone, just rewind it and rewatch that part. But it is interesting, and it's based in fact. If you want to watch our full reality check we did on Secretary Noem's comments, including a really interesting conversation, by the way, with a constitutional law professor, just scan that QR code on your screen or head to the Pulse section on our website, fox2detroit.com. You know, this weekend also marked a somber anniversary in our nation. It was 5 years ago. Sunday, George Floyd was killed by a Minneapolis police officer who kneeled on his neck for 9.5 minutes, even as Floyd cried out, "I can't breathe." Former officer Derek Chauvin was convicted of murder in the case. It sparked protests across the country, including here in Metro Detroit, as people called for police reform. A fight Floyd's brother says is still going.
We walked this earth doing everything we supposed to do. We marched. We did everything we could to put people out to do things, to fight for George. Not just George, it was Breonna Taylor, it was Ahmaud Arbery, it was Stephon Clark. People did a lot. You had Pamela Turner that was down in Baytown. People who lost their kids, and we're still here doing the same thing over and over and over again.
You know, this anniversary comes as the Trump administration moved to end settlements with Minneapolis and Louisville last week. Those ordered an overhaul of their police departments after the deaths of Floyd and also Breonna Taylor. All right, we're turning to the 2026 midterms right after the Pulse. Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan raising eyebrows by running as an independent. You know what? He thinks he could be part of a bigger change next year, one that he's telling other candidates, Democrats and Republicans, to be a part of. Detroit Councilmember Mary Waters and Troy Mayor Ethan Baker are taking it on next. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. And here now to talk more about the 2026 midterms, two people who know a lot about politics and these types of topics. Detroit City Council member Mary Waters and Troy Mayor Ethan Baker. Good to see you both. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse tonight.
All right, thank you.
And I got to start with this. This is interesting. So Mayor Mike Duggan came up with a pretty interesting statement. And I want to read it on the air here because it was fascinating. He says, hey, there's a lot of Republicans and Democrats and nonpartisans who are tired of the toxic relationship between the two parties. All the polls have me in the low 20s right now. So think about it. If you're running in a swing district that might get decided by 2, 3, or 4 points, if you have an independent for governor getting 20% of the vote, there's a very good chance that those independent voters are going to decide who wins. That's from the Detroit News. He was speaking to the Detroit News on that. Very interesting. Councilwoman, I'm going to begin with you. Right in your backyard, you have the current mayor saying there's too many people who are disenchanted with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Why not hang out on the independent slide and see what you gain on the way? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, let me just say that the person who wrote that article, Nolan Finley, has no credibility with me. Nolan Finley is a hypocrite, and because he lied on me. He distorted the truth, and he never once apologized for his actions. He never took the time to correct them. It had to be Devin Skillian who did that on Flashpoint. And
who corrected it, you're saying, the record.
Who corrected the record, absolutely.
Well, and putting that aside for a moment.
And
just
you can't talk about civility if you don't practice it. He ought not to be moderating that debate at the conference, Mackinac Conference.
And I know so many people will be there to listen to it. And listen, I know you obviously have some serious thoughts about that. I'm learning about that here on The Pulse. But I want to ask you specifically about this quote, though.
Sure.
If it had not been Nolan, but someone else who he told this to, he's basically saying that the people are disenchanted with the two parties. And he's hoping that by inviting other candidates to join the independent movement of disenchanted voters, those people pick up some steam. Does he have some truth to that?
Absolutely, he has some truth to it. People are disenchanted on both sides of the aisle, if you will. As a Democrat, as a Republican, people are sick and tired of business as usual, and this is what happened. So Mayor Duggan is on to something, and I do believe that he's going to pull some Democratic votes. He's going to pull some Republican votes. He's going to pull some independent votes, and he has a record that he has built himself that he can run on. People are sick and tired. The first thing he's got to do is to make sure that people are willing to release the shackles of the partisanship.
Yeah, well, that's a tall order because people are so attached to what they know. Mayor Baker, Mayor Duggan, right now, your counterpart out in the big city of Detroit says, hey, 20% from the left, 20% from the right, that makes 40%. And if I can get 40%, I can win this thing. Just in his political calculus, as a politician yourself, your thoughts on that?
I think his math makes sense. I don't know if it makes sense in practicality. I totally respect what he's doing. I'm a nonpartisan mayor as a Republican, so I get it. We operate as mayors differently because we do get Republican votes, Democrat votes, independent votes. But still, at the end of the day, when people go to the polling place, they see that R or that D, and that's usually where they go. There's studies that show that even someone who says they're independent tends to always vote the same way. They're an independent who always votes Republican or an independent who always votes Democrat. But his math is not incorrect, and it's an interesting concept, and we'll see if he's going to be a spoiler or if he's going to be somebody that actually can.
Councilwoman, the money matters in any you've run for office, you've won.
That's right.
You currently hold your seat for that reason, but when it comes to money, let's talk for a moment about how important it is. Governor Gretchen Whitmer ended up having to raise close to $37 million to win against someone who wasn't as formidable as an opponent. And yet Mayor Duggan somehow thinks the business community can help with this money. But that's a lot of money. Do you think that he can get that much money and more just from the business community, or he needs more, right?
I do believe that Mayor Duggan can raise the money. You have to think, I've had an opportunity to work with Mayor Duggan. I'm telling you, he is a go-getter, he is a fighter, and he is going to take the time to educate this entire state here in Michigan, the Democrats, the Republicans, the independents. Watch and see what I tell you. And he has a record to run on.
And that's important. Mayor Baker, I do have to ask you a little bit about, if you look at history, when he first ran more than 12 years ago, he was a write-in candidate. And he sat right here in this seat talking to the Pulse saying, people said I couldn't do it then, so bring it. This is he's kind of a lone guy who goes after things on his own.
No question. And he's a very talented, not just politician, but person in general. He's done really, really great things in Detroit, and he continues to do things wonderfully in his career. I think the money is an issue, though. It's going to force him to go out to the rest of the country to raise money because there's not enough independent money in Michigan for him to have a go of it. And I know he's reaching out to people like the No Labels Party and all of those independent groups that were initially never Trumpers, but are looking for something different.
But when you have someone like Jocelyn Benson, who's running with the Democratic Party backing her, not just here in Michigan, but across the country, those are big dollars coming from big organizations across this nation.
Yes,
right?
yes, but there are a whole lot of wealthy people around this country that don't necessarily tie themselves to an individual party either. So it was going to be very difficult for Mayor Duggan to break through that partisan thing in a primary. It was very difficult for him to do that. But you know what? I believe that he can do it running as an independent, and I believe that he will raise all the necessary funds. If you think about it, when he ran for mayor before, it was an educational process to get people to write his name in. He literally taught them how to write their names in through ads. You had people going out to the senior buildings.
I remember that whole thing.
That is correct. And he's that kind of person. He's done so many good things in the city of Detroit, and I believe that will resonate statewide.
I want to ask about Congressman John James, though. All very, very important to talk about the Republican side of things here, too. This is a man who's putting, really, in his calculus, his entire career as a congressperson and putting it at risk, likely, by going to run for this. What are your thoughts on his viability as a candidate?
I think he's run statewide twice before, and he's got great name recognition. He certainly has a great fundraising base. It's interesting that he's willing to step away from his role in Washington as a member of Congress. It might also be that it's going to be a really competitive seat in that 10th district next year, so that could play something into it as well. I think he's counting on the Trump endorsement. We'll see what happens with that. That's obviously going to bring a lot of attention and money. John James is a good guy from everything I know about him. He certainly is somebody who is very ambitious and works really hard for the people of his communities. He's made a calculation that running for governor right now at a time when typically this should be a Republican seat for governor because we go back and forth in Lansing, it seems like the right time for him.
What happens right now with this big, beautiful bill impacts greatly people like John James and others across the country who are running. And so I want to ask you, we only have about a minute left, but 4.6 million people, according to the Urban Institute, may be at risk of losing Medicaid, who are working people who currently aren't fulfilling that work requirement of 80 hours a month as community service, school, or work. Councilwoman, what's your concern about that?
Well, first of all, we're placing, once again, dollars over lives. And I find it ironic, on this Memorial Day, so many of people who made the ultimate sacrifice, and I know that they didn't do so to make sure that we strip working people of their benefits, strip people who really need it that are marred in poverty. No, they were working people who gave the ultimate sacrifice.
If, Councilwoman, these folks, whoever is in that 4.6 million, truly are not working and meeting those requirements of 80 hours or 20 hours a week to do community service, school, or work, and they're not working but they're able-bodied, what do you tell them?
Well, what I tell them is to do whatever it is best for them. Each person has a unique situation, people with disabilities, and I want to remind the Trump administration, it's going to hurt a lot of Republicans too. Urban areas, people with disabilities. Don't think you're just going after those in the urban areas.
15 seconds. Are you concerned, Mayor Baker?
The Senate's going to change the bill so much. I think all the things we're talking about now with the Medicaid cuts are going to get addressed by the Senate because there's no way this Senate's going to let anything like that drastically happen. I really believe that.
I really enjoy having you both on. I wish we had more time, but I got a quick wrap here. So I want to say, Mayor Baker, Councilwoman Waters, thank you for your time here. We're keeping the conversation about Medicaid going after the break. Attorney Pat Simasko is answering your questions right here on The Pulse. See how quickly I got to break here? We'll be right back. Bye. Done. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only political talk show. This is The Pulse. Joining us now to dive deeper into Medicaid and answer your questions, elder law attorney and financial advisor Pat Simasko. I got to tell you, one of the things I love most about this show is the ability for us to answer your questions at home. I don't care what your political stripes are. You wonder what's going on? Well, we have the answers here. Pat, always good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to begin with Rebecca on The Pulse. Rebecca, thanks for your question. You're asking us this: what is the plan for those without coverage? What is recommended they do? That's a great question.
Well, you have to start early. The younger the people are, if you can start saving for seniors, basically I'm an elder law attorney, so I'm dealing with senior citizens. So look at long-term care insurance, look at carving out a piece of your retirement plan into planning for that long-term care. So many people are living for years and years and years and not necessarily healthier. And you need to plan for it as early as you can.
So start early, even if you don't think you're at an age where you're even near retirement, just get started.
Yeah, or you have to start planning to get Medicaid. So you have to look at your assets and your income and see how to make sure that you qualify for those Medicaid benefits. Luckily, they're starting to do some Medicaid at home or in assisted living. So that's one of the things that may be cut, though, with the budget issues that we're having.
A concern that so many people have.
Yeah.
We have another question here. Bill, thank you for asking us a question here. You're asking, can you please explain the difference between Medicare and Medicaid? Reading some of these comments makes me cringe. That note, by the way, we should just add that to every time I post on Facebook. Reading some of these comments makes me cringe. Yeah, I hear you. There's a lot of vitriol out there, but I answer Bill's question.
Sure. Medicare is hospital insurance. Everybody gets Medicare when they turn 65. And it pays for hospital with your coordinated with like Blue Cross or something like that. If you have to go into a nursing home, Medicare will pay up to 100 days of rehab. After that, it's private pay unless you get on Medicaid. So Medicaid is nursing home insurance, or Medicare is hospital insurance.
And are you concerned about some of these people being cut, or do you think it is that work requirement issue that we're hearing about? We keep hearing from, like Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, said, look, we're not talking about everyday people being cut. We're talking about people who aren't meeting the work requirements. Do you believe that's true?
I don't know, because you have to see how the budget is going to be addressed by each state, because it's a federally funded program that's administered by the state. So if Michigan gets so many $1 million cut out of their Medicaid budget, how are they going to assign it to which units, which divisions? Hospitals, are they going to be cut? Worker or recipients need to go. Those are the younger people, right?
Well, and the Senate, listen, they got to get their hands on this bill, as we talked about, as you heard Mayor Baker say. But really, a lot of people on the right and left are hoping through reconciliation they figure something out here to make sure that people aren't hurt. Let's go take a look at our next question here on the Pulse. Thank you for your question here. Jan, I know people who have Medicaid or Medicare and curious on why they get or need both. Some are at Social Security Medicare age.
Yeah, so Medicare is hospital insurance. Everybody has to get it. Everybody's paid their whole working career into the Medicare. So when they get 65, they have to take Medicare. Part A and B, you can pay for part of it. Medicaid, you have to apply for it only if you need it. If you are in need in a nursing home, you don't have the money to pay for it, you don't have enough income to pay for it, so you have to apply for that. And that's the nursing home insurance part of it. Medicare is the hospital insurance part of it.
Well, let's get to the next question, because it literally, that's what Lee is asking us here in the Pulse. He's saying, hey, but what happens to people in nursing homes that do depend on either Medicare or Medicaid, as you talk about here, group homes, rehabs? Talk about that for a moment. Again,
sure.
Are you the 4.6 million people that could be required to show their work requirements of school or work or community service? Is that what we're talking about?
No,
here?
that's the younger people.
Yeah.
So younger people.
Should they be concerned in the nursing home?
No, because they're not. If my dad, who's 82, and he was in a nursing home, they're not going to make him go to work. He's got dementia, he can't drive. So it's the younger people that may be forced to go to work to get the benefit or work for charities and things like that. That'd be one thing. The senior citizens, the 65 and older, that need the Medicaid benefit because they can't work, they have dementia, they had a stroke.
But my question, I wasn't saying that the people in the nursing homes should be required to work. I'm asking, are you concerned about the cuts that we're seeing affecting those vulnerable folks who obviously are not in a work category?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You are concerned?
No, yeah, absolutely, because they may cut benefits from those people, or they'll cut funding from the nursing homes that are paying for the care. So it has to go one place or the other.
Bottom line is this, Pat. There is something that people can do, and we want to empower people on this show. What is it that you want people to know about that you're not hearing on the national news about how to get help?
10,000 people a day are turning 65. Nobody has long-term care insurance. They have car insurance, they have house insurance, they don't have long-term care insurance, and the main reason is because I'm never going to the nursing home. Everyone says, I'm not going to the nursing home, so I don't need long-term care. A third of us will be in the nursing home.
Got it.
For at least 3 years. The average is 3 years, so that's hundreds of thousands. $10,000 a month is nursing home costs. So if you can plan for that, and there's certain policies of long-term care, if you don't use it, you lose it. They have life insurance policies now that if you don't use the benefit while you're alive, it'll pay your family if you pass away.
People obviously need to talk to experts like you, and I know that people will after they see this. We thank you, Pat Simasko. Sorry we're out of time, but we thank you for joining us as usual on The Pulse. That is The Pulse for tonight, as usual. Thanks for joining us. Have a good one.